Ladies and gentlemen, I know that we are rushing you through some of these things, for which we apologize. I've had the opportunity to, my name is Jay Rosenbek, I'm a speech language pathologist, to watch what's been going on in this room this morning. Two things I noticed. One, a great many of you fill up every free moment with talking. What's better than being able to go out and talk to people about the weather, the challenges, all those other things that we love to share. And there's another thing going on in here. We go up to that table in the back and we get something to eat and drink. And what is better than good food and good liquid? And when we combine those, when we sit around talking to one another over a plate of food, we probably have what is absolutely one of the best situations than any of us as men, women, and children can experience. And that's what I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about today. But I want to say one other thing by way of background, and that is this. I came, like many of you, through the rain this morning, and I listened to all those presentations, and I was impressed. I found out from that first speaker that there are researchers all over the world doing wonderful things to try to help us understand what's happening at the level of cells and molecules and proteins. And I listened to Kelly Foote talk about medications and surgery. So I listened to presentations on what other people can do for us. What I want to talk about for the next 25 minutes or so is what you and I can do for ourselves. Because it seems to me that it is not an exaggeration to say that the men and women in this room, some of whom are temporarily able-bodied like me, and some of whom are living with Parkinson's disease and other conditions, really must depend not only upon our healthcare systems, but we must depend upon ourselves and on one another. So, my message today is to talk about some of those problems that some of you may have experienced with your talking, with your chewing, your swallowing, and your eating. Some of you may know that you or your loved one is quicker to drool now than he or she was. And some of you may also experience that thought comes a little slower, and that's not to say that any of us has lost our mind. That's not to say, as Kelly suggested, we aren't crazy. But some of us are slower. And I was really saddened to learn that when I was 20, my brain filled up this whole bony structure up here, and now that I'm 72, I've got spaces. I don't know about you, but I really wish I didn't have those spaces, and so I'm going to try to keep my brain active and fill those spaces up as much as I can. What we now know, we don't know it for absolute sure, but we are more and more convinced, is that there are some things that we can do as men and women with Parkinson's disease, and as those people who love them and who care for them, to influence this condition, in addition to the medications, in addition to the surgery. There are some things that we can do. This has got a fancy name. This is called neuroprotection. And all that means, and I tried to show it there on that little slide with the hands holding that delicate neuron. There are some things that you and I can do perhaps to preserve those neurons at least for a period, or make sure that those neurons deteriorate at the slowest possible rate. Why bother? Why think about preservation to the degree that we can? Why think about self-involvement when we've got wonderful physicians and we've got wonderful surgeons and we have got pills and we have got electrodes and we've got a scientific community working night and day to get us even smarter? Why worry? Because despite those developments, we all know that with time there is change, and very often that change is not positive, but it is negative. And we resist that change because, as I tried to suggest here with these two lovely veterans talking about what I assume is a VFW, about the way it was when they were young. And as I've tried to suggest down here in the right-hand corner with that older man with a smile on his face, talking and eating are some of our biggest joys. And my obligation is to work with you, if appropriate, to help you understand why you might talk as loud, not talk as loud as you did, or why you may not take your pills as easily, why they seem to get stuck right here in your throat, and then you bend over to pick up the laundry and the pill goes shooting out and goes under the washing machine, and there you are. What are you going to do next? We know a lot of stuff. We know, and I tried to suggest it here on this slide, all the parts of your internal world in your body that work together to talk and to swallow. We don't think about these body parts much, but they're there, and boy, they are among the most exquisite body parts that any of us has. And we know how these body parts work. We know that the better you breathe, the louder your voice is. We know that the better your voice box works, the smoother and more melodic your voice is. And when it doesn't work, it can sound pretty hard. It can sound kind of soft. And we understand that the way our tongues and our lips and our mouths work help us to make clear speech, and when they're impaired, it can be hard to understand. We understand all of that, and now you guys do too. And so, just as Kelly Foote made you guys as smart as medical students, you're now as smart as any PhD speech-language pathologist anywhere in the world, because you can listen to somebody talk, and you can get a really good idea about what part of that person's body is not working the way it used to. So that if a person has a soft, mumbly voice, how many of you have had to work with that, where the voice is just not as powerful, especially as the day goes on? Or just not as powerful after you've been out to the grocery store than it was before you shopped for a couple of hours. I suspect many of you have noticed that. When you hear that, you know, yep, it's the breathing parts of the body and it's the voice box that are causing that problem. Because you see, what we don't talk about as much, but what you and I know is that Parkinson's disease and its relatives make the muscles of your face and your breathing and your tongue and your throat as stiff and as belligerent as any of the other muscles in your body. And these muscles, all of these muscles, not only talk, they swallow. And the day you came out of the womb, you started to swallow. And you have swallowed without thinking about it every single day for all of those years between your birth and today, or the day that you got Parkinson's disease or some other condition, or the day that Parkinson's disease or some other condition got so severe that you noticed you had to be a little more careful. You had to cut up your steak into a little bit smaller bites. You had not to gulp your iced tea. You had to sip it. You noticed that you had to start to make some changes, and many of these changes you and I make because we're smart and we care about our well-being automatically, and we almost don't even know they have occurred. But what can happen is that the swallow can get extremely impaired, so that nutrition is harder work, is less pleasant, is more dangerous, and is less adequate. None of us likes to think about the end of our lives. But when we do, especially in a protective environment like this, begin to think about the ends of our lives, we begin to think about what will take me. One of the things that the men and women in this room with Parkinson's disease and other conditions are often taken by is pneumonia, aspiration pneumonia. In a long ago period, maybe when some of you were young as I was, we called that the old man's friend, because it took us away when we wanted to go. But I suspect that most people in this room, probably all the people in this room, are not ready to go, and they, by God, are not ready to go like that. And so that's my message. We have ways of taking responsibility for ourselves if we have the need, if we have the residual energy that can help forestall these times when we are choking and scaring our loved ones to death, when we are talking and when no one can hear us. Just for fun, I'll play you a little bit of a swallow, because we're very good at measuring what's going on with the swallowing. This is a fluoroscopic examination. And let me get my orientation here with you guys. What you see down there in that left-hand corner, with apologies for those of you in the back since we don't have a tiered auditorium here, is you see a person looking off in this direction, and we're taking an x-ray, so it's like we're seeing right into that person. Now, those of you who have a loved one here who has prompted you to think, Lord, Lord, I wish I knew what was going on inside that guy. Here's your test. So let me just show you. What you're going to see is a dark shape. We call it a bolus. And you're going to see that bolus, and I'm going to tell you that its size is less than a teaspoon. Less than a teaspoon. Now you think about yourself when you were healthy, when you were healthier, or even now. You take a teaspoon of anything, it just goes. But watch what happens to this fellow. There's a little bit of that bolus. Now I'm going to have him swallow another one. Now watch what happens. See, it comes into your throat. That's right here. Now he's swallowing. We're at 5 seconds. We're at 6 seconds. We're at 7 seconds. We're at 8 seconds. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 seconds. Now I ask you to think about how discouraging it would be, or perhaps is, to have to swallow 15 or so times over 15 or more seconds to take care of a single teaspoon of Jell-O. That kind of stress would send us all around the bend, wouldn't it? What's interesting about this person is that he was actually an airplane pilot, and he didn't want anyone to know that he had this problem because he thought it was threatening his ability to fly. And so he hid this from everyone at his company. He always walked around with a water bottle to give the impression that he was just like everyone else. But it finally occurred to people, especially the co-pilot, that they never saw him take a sip from it. And the reason why is because this man's swallow had deteriorated to the point where it would take him up to 40 minutes to swallow even half a cup of water. And as you guys know, that's not the way to live. And so the issues come up about what can you and I do when these kinds of things happen to us, when we talk, when our spouses and friends get frustrated, when I want to quit talking because when I'm at a deal like this and I say something, nobody at the table can hear me, and that's not rewarding. Now, many of us, quite understandably, when faced with something like that, say, well, you know what? I think my wife, we'll pick on the women first, and then we'll reverse it and pick on the men second. I think my wife has selective hearing. Yeah, she only listens to certain things. Or the wife says about the hubby, you know, if the old fool would just get a hearing aid, this would all take care of itself. Well, both of those things are probably somewhat true, but I think there's a larger truth, and that is communication really requires two people or more, and it requires contributions from two or more people, and there's probably, as there was in my first marriage, plenty of blame to go around. And on the swallowing side, how many of you have seen or experienced problems swallowing pills, problem with drooling, finding that you have to clear your throat more often, that you sometimes choke, that steak is not as easy, popcorn. Popcorn is the canary in the mine. Popcorn is one of those things that gets very difficult to swallow very early on, as do peanuts and lettuce. And then we have that problem which you and I want to avoid forever or as long as we can, the problem of aspiration pneumonia. And so now the issue becomes, all right, what do we do? We don't need to be targets, ladies and gentlemen. We do not need to have a target above our heads that makes us likely for aspiration pneumonia, makes us likely for social rejection. And while we cannot forestall some of those things in all instances, there are some things we can do to make sure that if we get overwhelmed by God, because we get overwhelmed only after we have resisted for as long as we can. And fortunately, what we can do for ourselves does not necessarily require trip after trip after trip after trip after trip, even to that wonderful 4th floor unit to watch all those fish. Most of the things, if we have the need, if we have the drive, if we have the energy, and if we have the inclination, we can do on our own. And you don't have to work as hard as this guy to get this done. It's easier. My favorite therapeutic device is the lazy boy. Now, lazy boys have got a bad reputation. Lazy boys are supposedly the last outpost of the terminally inactive. And they are good for that. But they can also be turned into a very nice environment for doing a little therapy, because you can sit yourself down in your lazy boy, you can tilt it back just a little tiny bit, and then you can do a very simple exercise of just bringing your head forward and looking down at your midsection, and then up and back and forth, and do that 30 or so times. And what you do with that simple exercise is you begin to increase the strength in these muscles that are right here under your chin. These are not only the muscles that many of us wish didn't look so floppy. These are also the muscles that, floppy or not, and remarkably enough, actually turn on and contract to open up our esophagus, because we are connected from our chin all the way to our throat, and the way these muscles work determine how our throat opens up. Who knew that? So you can take your lazy boy and you can tilt yourself back in that lazy boy to a level that is comfortable for you, and you can start doing what we call a chin tuck, and you can help preserve the muscles that are important to swallow. I've been doing this a long time. I started my practice in 1970, so I'm in my 43rd year of practice. Every single day of that, I have gotten some joy. That joy almost inevitably comes not from my own accomplishments, but from the accomplishments of other people around me. But I understand that words are cheap, that action is hard, that Parkinson's disease and some of the conditions like it can cut into our energy, can cut into our motivation, can rob us of some of our initiative. I understand that it is much easier to talk about these than to do them. But the notion is that if there is even a little bit of energy in the day, there is, for example, one simple thing that one can do to help oneself and to make it easier on those who care for you. Or you can roll up a towel and stick it under your tongue, under your chin, and press down. And some of you in this room perhaps have had that particular exercise from me. Or, especially if you hide yourself from the grandchildren, or at least explain it to them before you start this, you can grab your tongue with a little soft paper or cloth, pull your tongue out, and swallow that is a devilishly hard activity, but that's about the best activity for exciting your swallowing muscles that anybody has ever come up with. So you stick out your tongue, you grasp it with a soft cloth, you hold it steady, you swallow, and if you can't, you don't protrude it so far, you stick it out as far as you can and still swallow, and you try it again. And you do that a few times every day. There's no magic here. There are no guarantees in healthcare. There are no guarantees in life, are there? Well, a couple they tell us about. April 15th has just passed. We hope the other inevitability is a long way away for the rest of us. This has got a fancy name, but all it involves is swallowing hard and holding your breath. And as a last resort, you can hold a pencil above your nose. Above your lip. No, that's not true. Don't do this one. This one won't help. It will draw the attention of the dog, the grandchildren, and your previous best friend. That's the last resort. I've only lived in the South for 13 years. I came here in the year 2000. I'm from Wisconsin. It's not that there are not a lot of devout people in Wisconsin. It is that when you compare it to the South, those Wisconsinites probably lack a little in devotion. Some of them. Lord, if you're from Wisconsin, talk to me after and I'll make it peace with you. What I've noticed here in the South is that there is a real attention on the part of many to religion and all the things that go with it. But whether or not you're religious, one of the things I've also noticed is that the majority of people here read, talk, sing, recite, and any of those things you do, if you do them regularly, can help preserve your function. The absolute worst thing that any of us can do is nothing. That's not to say that some of us have not been forced to do nothing. And that's not an indictment, because I understand disease as well, some diseases as well as some of you. But boy, if you have any energy to do something, please do it. Because remember that our brains are like muscles in the sense that they will respond to exercises. I want to come talk to you guys about what you can, if you have energy and inclination in an environment, do for yourselves to help preserve two of your most precious gifts. The gift of communication and the gift of eating and drinking the things that you like to eat and drink. Disease makes these performances difficult. But if we work hard, sometimes we can prevent them from making those two precious abilities impossible. If I can help you in that regard, please feel free to call upon me. Thank you for your attention.